Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on my show. And so I'm joined by Jonathan Lee. Now, as you know, the world is so small. I've actually never met this gentleman in person, but our worlds intertwine greatly. And that's just the way of the world, right? One, social media wise, but also just the way of Northern Virginia, because this gentleman is also a Northern Virginia native like me, and the world is that small. So before we get into it, Jonathan, can you just give the listeners a little bit of background on who you are?
Philip, pleasure to meet you, man. My name is Jonathan Lee. I currently reside in Seattle, Washington. I am a director of admissions at an independent day school named Seattle Academy. I'm out in Seattle, Washington. I work particularly with upper school students. I'm a boarding school graduate of Episcopal High School located in Alexandria, Virginia. I have 1 year under my belt where my 8th grade year, I played 9th grade basketball for TC Williams. And we were 17-1, only losing to Robinson High School. But at that time, just really enjoyed my experience there before I matriculated over to boarding school. And then a graduate of College of William & Mary, Bachelor of Arts degree in government, and then an MBA also from William & Mary as well. So I doubled or tripled down in Virginia, so to speak.
I love it. So take us back to that journey. You're a native of Alexandria. You could have just as easily stayed at TC Williams, which is now, I guess, the City of Alexandria Public Schools. Yeah. What was some of the rationale and decision to go from TC to Episcopal, which is down the street from each other?
As I navigated the team with Griffin Smith and others that you share a mutual friendship with, I noticed that there were so many kids in Alexandria. And while I was lucky to make that 8th grade team, that 9th grade team, my 8th grade year, I looked up. That was the time period where people were moving into the school districts for various reasons athletically. And my parents said, we're not going to put all our eggs in you making the varsity basket in this time. And TC was large then, man. At that time point, my 8th grade year was the first year they moved all the 9th graders to Minnie Howard and moved out the 9th graders out of TC Williams. So my parents like, man, that's a lot with bringing together GW and Hammond students. I was a Hammond kid, and the GW kids were kind of that rivalry that were going to come together. So my parents looked up. One of our church members was at Episcopal High School at the time. His older brother, his younger brother was my age, and they said, you know what? Why don't you come look at the school? And to go from 1 in 1,500 kids in a class to 1 in 100, my parents looked up and said, that's a no-brainer. And so that's what made me look at Episcopal High School and attend it and go there for 4 years, even though I could bike ride less than 3 minutes home downhill without pedaling to get from Fort Williams Parkway to Duke Street where I lived at.
So did you actually, for those that are not familiar with boarding schools, is it you have to stay on campus?
So Episcopal High School is one of 2 schools in the country that bills themselves as 100% residential. The other one is St. Paul's up in New Hampshire, but we are a school where everyone lives there that goes there. The only day students, are faculty kids. So as a kid that lived in Alexandria or a kid that lived in China, Australia, Africa, you lived on campus there for 7 days of the week.
So on weekends, you wouldn't go home?
I would go home occasionally on the weekends. You had to have a point system at the time when I was there. But similar to not being a commuter school, we had a residential life program that had us all. You went to dances, you went to mixers, you went to basketball games, you went to football games. They had a person that was in charge of your well-being during the weekends there. So if you're a kid from Texas, maybe you came to my house a little bit to visit my parents, but you resided on campus 100% of the time.
Gotcha. So talk about TC. I know TC is just like Mount Vernon, very black. Talk about Episcopal. Was Episcopal very black?
Not the least bit, man. We had what we call the black table, man. So there were 400 kids. There were about 18 black kids that all sat at the same table. There was a Chinese or Asian table that allowed for the 20 Asian kids to sit there together, and then maybe the 5 or 6 Korean kids. Since then, having gone back and worked there as a admissions officer, there are about 40 to 50 black kids now and 50 to 60 Asian kids. So while those tables have diversified and grown larger, those tables are still there, having just left there 2 years ago. It was crazy to be in kind of the United Nations, Alexandria, Virginia, going to Hammond, seeing GW, then seeing TC Williams, then going to a world where it was Black, white, Asian, and a sprinkling of Latinx. So what I grew up and learned and loved was drastically different my ninth grade year of high school.
And so during that experience, did you experience overt racism?
I would say it was not overt. I would say it was blatant. It was blatant and in your face and just there. I remember there were moments in my life being called the N word and having Confederate flag tiles parading around me. I didn't know what a Confederate flag tile meant, what that stood for. And then you learn from the different folks in that demographic that it stood for slavery. It stood for the proclamation that white was better and white was right. I didn't understand that growing up, being a Black kid in Alexandria, realizing that outside the gates of that institution, that you had a real world of the melting pot of DC, of Chocolate City. But yet 10 minutes away from that, 10 miles away from that, you're in a different world. I didn't know what it was meant to kind of be looked at as someone marginalized. Oh, you're just here to play basketball or you're here for a quota. That those moments were very difficult, and not having a voice that I have now as an adult and not knowing that I rightfully had a place there as a student. So it was very hard, very tough. And there wasn't much of an outlet for that mental health or that sanity that you needed outside of calling mom and dad to be like, what did you guys place me at? But again, it made me stronger. It made me the person I am today.
So that's very traumatic and very difficult. Would you say? And we're going to transfer to college, but would you say was it more positive than negative, like on that because that's trauma, right? But would you say overall my experience there was 80% really good, and these were instances of negative that negatively affected me, or was it a lot more strife than good?
I would say that at every positive moment, there was a constant reminder that I was Black. There's a moment that I was reminded that I was on financial aid. There's a moment that I was reminded that you're not of the in crowd, be it as a student, as a graduate, as a faculty member, as an alum. It was just these moments of constant reminders. And that's exactly why I created Bridging Legacies Across Campuses, because that was the narrative that was missing. I didn't get to see what Black excellence looked like. The Black graduates that didn't like football, they didn't come back to the homecoming games. They were gone. So as I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with, macro, micro aggressions, racism, discrimination, bigotry, good old boy network, imposter syndrome, I had no one to talk to about that in a way that provided a resting place, because they didn't come back to school. And I wasn't mature enough to handle it. So now, as a school administrator and a director of admissions now, looking at independent schools, I holistically don't want kids, and particularly my kids, to endure what I did, because yes, that was trauma. And that's how I lead my life every day, is trying to make sure that those moments of trauma for BIPOC students and white students alike, because I'm not selfish in my endeavor. So when I do what I do for brown students, I do that for white students as well, because you lift up the lowest common denominator, the tide rises for everyone.
I love it. So most people didn't go back, and then you went to William and Mary. What was your decision to go to William and Mary?
I wanted to make my trauma worthwhile. That while I was there, I was grinding and working hard. I knew day one when I got that financial aid offering to go to Episcopal High School, my mom and dad said, you're going to go to the best in-state opportunity, or you're going to go to the place that offers you the most amount of money. So as I worked and grinded at Episcopal High School, I went to William & Mary on a full academic scholarship, not for athletics. Well, I walked on to play basketball there and had a good time before I quit and managed the women's basketball team. I went there on my academic standings of what I worked for at Episcopal. So every day while I had those microaggressions, I was working to graduate with honors as best as I could to get into William & Mary and to succeed. And I did that.
Was it particular? William & Mary's, shout out to them. I think it's a good school. Was it like William & Mary's the pinnacle school, or UVA, or just straight up the other goal of just academic scholarship?
Academic scholarship.
Okay.
I did not apply to UVA because it was a doppelganger of my high school. And as I looked at William & Mary, there were some sprinkling of some New Yorkers and New Jersey kids up there and Northern Virginia kids in a demographic that was different than UVA. And again, I just did not want to have a repeat of my high school experience, seeing how many kids from my high school went to UVA. So no disrespect to Thomas Jefferson's second school, but I wanted to go to his first school, William & Mary.
Yikes, shots fired. That's funny. You call it second soup. What about we talked on my podcast. I'm sure with your academics, you could have as in not you're academically qualified for scholarships everywhere. What was the decision not to go to like a HBCU on a full ride?
There was just this moment that I had been so submerged in whiteness that I didn't really know about blackness yet. And so while I knew about Howard, I knew about Hampton, knew about Morehouse and whatnot. There was this moment of the stigma about funding and dollars and about that education I was going to get from my high school experience. It was $28,000 a year to go to my high school at the time. It's now $65,000 a year to go to my high school now, Episcopal. And so in looking at that endeavor, there was this value proposition of what was the value in submerging myself in this white world and then jumping into this all black world. And would I even be ready for it? Because again, there's this moment, you know, the term Oreo, right? You're black on the outside, white on the inside. But yet, if you go to HBCU, you're not black enough. But if you go to a PWI, you're not white enough because you're black. So is that misconception there and the ideology that my parents and I, we applied to Hampton and Howard and I got in, but we didn't even consider it. And again, their financial aid wasn't as handsome as William & Mary's as well.
That's why I said they didn't give you all the monies either.
No, the
So
funding
it's a
wasn't
financial
there.
decision too. So straight up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, but you're going to a well-established, probably the oldest university in the United States, I believe. William & Mary's the oldest.
William & Mary is the second school in the country, second oldest school in the country next to Harvard.
Yeah.
And we are the oldest school in the country not to make the NCAA tournament for basketball as well.
But
so
I'm
we
saying
have that
you're going
dubious
from old white school to old white school. So even though you said it was UVA 2.0, was it Episcopal 2.0 going to William & Mary?
No. So I would say for me, the experiences and the microaggressions that I have felt in high school, they were still there in college, but not to the level of blatancy, not to the level of discomfort. I was able to digest it in a better way. Again, there were more Black kids there. It wasn't a lot, but there were more. There was a wonderful office of multicultural affairs. Shout outs to Dr. Sean Glover and her team, Vernon Hurt, who's now at Towson, or is all over the country now. And that Blackness I was able to get. I think the Alphas just came to my campus maybe my sophomore year to start a remote chapter. They were coming out of VCU and Hampton to kind of bring the young brothers on. The Deltas and AKAs were there, but not in high numbers. So going to William & Mary for me, again, there was a Native American school that was there and recognizing what they had done during their pagan ways to educate the Native Americans that was there. There's still colonial Williamsburg with the moment of slavery and Jamestown, what it means. But we were down there to get educated, man. I was there to say, you know what, I'm there to get this degree from this wonderful school and go from there. So again, I had been galvanized and toughened up and calloused in a way in my high school experience that I wasn't really seeking out that trauma in college in a way.
So then that one was less traumatic and a more positive memory. And then I think you specifically said like one of the parts that contributed to that trauma was people didn't come back. So in the William & Mary experience, did Black alum come back and engage like you wish would have happened at Episcopal?
No, I would say they didn't.
They didn't do it there
home. Again, I was in Greek. I didn't pledge. And with my athletics, there was a moment there too. So you had the athletic folks that came back that you would see from football, basketball, track, and so on. But for me, it was really the homecoming was great. We did have a good, strong following that's grown since then. I don't participate in it myself personally, but there was just something better there. And again, I was more callous where I wasn't hurt and wasn't as sensitive to the approach of what I was missing because it was better than where I had left in high school. So I honestly came into William & Mary a little bit tougher and more resilient and had been away from my parents in a way to know what it meant to be in Williamsburg 3 hours away from my parents' house.
Gotcha. So now you navigated the world. How did you get into the field of education, particularly education for independent schools?
I had always been a tour guide while I was at Episcopal. So even though I was traumatized during my experience there, I was still disproportionately selling the school as a part of the admissions office. I originally went into project management directly after college since I had a BA in government and was working to be a project manager. But from day one, I volunteer coached at Episcopal High School in cross country and basketball. Through that volunteer coaching, it let me try to come back to be part of the community in admissions. There were some disparaging moments that I didn't feel comfortable with, trying to get employment there for one way or another, but I stuck to it. But I saw value in what it would mean to be back in my alma mater, to be that face, that Black face, to provide synergy and comfort for those other young students going there. And later, I became an admissions officer there, became a dorm parent there, and later a dorm head of the ninth grade dormitory for the boys. So as I worked every day to get folks to come to the admissions program and enroll at Episcopal High School, I was able to promise white, Black, any parent that had a boy that I'm going to be the ninth grade dorm head to help mold them and lead them in a way to help them be a honest child and a child in the Episcopalian way. Because again, we are Episcopal High School, to govern them and guide them as a Black school leader in that moment. And I relished that moment during my tenure there as a admissions officer and a ninth grade dorm parent.
So I feel like maybe you were channeling the things that you wish you would have. So what were some of the programs that you implemented or implement now that was like, wow, this is a way that I can heal that young Jonathan. Like, this is my way of helping that person that was like me. So now I have the power, the authority, the resources to do so.
So one of the things that was amazing during my MBA program at William & Mary, they talked about a North Star and your vision and mission. And that's when I was onboarding to create Bridging Legacies Across Campuses. So I actually reached out to my senior leaders, the senior monitors on the dorm, and say, hey, I want you all to create a vision and mission of the dorm and draft it up as seniors. Then I want you to reach out to the upperclassmen that are on the dorm. And I want you to lead a meeting to tell the freshmen of the dorm what our vision and mission of our dormitory is. It was called Hummel at the time. And we did so. It was about character and conduct and being leaders of the campus. So that way, when the kids did something silly, because again, they're teenage boys, there's 60 of them on a ninth grade dorm, they're going to make mistakes. But instead of yelling at them and discouraging them of who they were, I was simply able to, and it was that year was during the end of the pandemic. So Zoom was rampant in our area. I was able to get on Zoom and say, hey guys, let's jump on a Zoom session. Everybody boot up in your room. Let's talk about what our vision and mission was. And let's talk about what you had broken in the dorm or what I heard you all calling each other in dorm, because that's not what our vision and mission set up. That's not what we set up as a foundation. And in doing so, it wasn't me setting something up that they couldn't live by. My senior leaders wrote that themselves. So they were literally governing themselves by their own standards. One of the things I love doing as an advisor, even today in Seattle, I like to write emails to parents and to students, and I BCC the group. So that if they have a bad day or good day or whatever goes on in life, I blind copper and copy the parents and the students, so it's transparency, so they know that I'm there. And then I let the parents know what we talk about in advisory group. When the African American dancer Twitch took his own life to suicide he was on the Ellen DeGeneres show.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's very important. And while I want my kids to know that I'm a voice and sounding board in their lives, we watched one of his first dance performances on the Sidinka Dance show. And then I ended the conversation with saying, hey, should you all need anything, reach out to me as a mentor, as a person, as a sounding board. Because I think there are moments where we as kids and teenagers, you know that person's in your life, but they don't ever blatantly tell you that. You just make that assumption. I wanted to leave nothing to chance for those group of kids in Seattle to tell them, I am here for you in your time of need, because that's the mental health piece I think kids need to hear. And then to be able to tell the parents, this is a tough real life conversation we had. And please know that we had the conversation, and you can hopefully talk to your kids about that as well.
Excellent. So talk about just moving forward and bridging legacies across campus. How did that come to fruition?
It occurred watching the video of George Floyd be murdered for approximately 8 minutes. It occurred when Breonna Taylor's body wasn't valued to be worth more than a wall of bullet holes. That as I sat and looked, I was watching Instagram in 2020 and saw stories of microaggressions, macroaggressions, racism, discrimination, and said, damn it, those are the same stories I had back in 97 at my private school. And here are these kids from private schools, public schools, from colleges, universities across the country writing about them. But yet, potentially the same school administrators that maybe I was there with a kid, they're still watching these moments and doing nothing. And while I didn't want to throw a rock in the glass house at these institutions I was working at and attended, I wanted to show what it meant to have Black excellence, Asian excellence, Latinx excellence, to say we've gone to these various institutions and we've graduated. But what does it mean to show a young 17-year-old, young 13-year-old Black boy or girl who we were as graduates? So when I use your narrative and your bio, Philip, that's what I want to do and say, hey, we existed. We're not just siloed away. You may not go back to James Madison or Bowie for homecoming as an adult with your family, but you still exist. And that's what Bridging Legacy seeks to do, is provide that sounding board and that mirror and window of Black excellence, BIPOC excellence, of what it means to be who we are. Because with our stories and our narratives, our faces, our voices, we can connect for the next generation. Because again, education is supposed to be the equalizer for what Dr. King said about, I want our 4 kids to be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
So that's excellent. So is it almost like an informal way of building an alumni network, but at various schools, kind of like that alumni
Yes.
network you're talking about? Out of these stories and this narrative, thank you for featuring. I feel honored. Was there relationships that came out of that? Like someone read a bio and they followed up with the person that you featured. You know, has relationships or things came out of that network that you built?
Definitely, man. There's a young man that's currently at Union. He may be a junior or senior. Being able to connect him with my best man and my best friend since first grade, being able to connect those two together, because he's a Union graduate, 15 years, 20 years older. But that young man says, man, I'm at Union in Schenectady, New York. I don't know what it means to see a bunch of Black dudes. Being able to instantaneously give him 2 bios and 2 phone numbers of 2 buddies and say, reach out to them. That same best man being able to talk to a young lady that graduated from William & Mary. She goes, man, I want to go rent a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,000 a month, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, young lady, that doesn't exist in Northern Virginia. But being able to connect her to my best man who works for property management, who can say, you'd be better off getting a roommate because I do this every day for business, that doesn't exist. And being able to put them on the phone call. Being able to connect people from different walks of life, Brown graduates. So a guy that graduates with Brown in 1980. And this young Black kid says, man, I'm the first one in my family to be educated by going to an Ivy League. But well, let me introduce you to the other Black man that had that same thing happen to him and his family. That there's a moment, if you watch sports, if you watch Kevin Hart and Draymond Green and LeBron James, they go to barbershops or cold water baths and they sit and talk about these things with professionals. Why can't we do that on the educational sector of having that barbershop-like moment about BIPOC education? Because that's what, again, education is supposed to be the key to equalize this movement of white, Black, and everyone together.
Yeah, I love it. No, actually, I think education is the key, but also seeing it, and you see it, you can believe it. You know, like it's really hard to see yourself in spaces when you don't see people like that look like you, but like that's the power of mentorship, because
Exactly.
if you have a mentor or someone that's ahead of you or they've done it before, paved that way, they don't particularly even have to do anything but just exist. And seeing them exist allows you to say, I can do that too. Can you talk about that for yourself? Like you may have said you didn't get it as much, but when did you start seeing people that were older or at a different stage in life that guided you or helped you serve as an example, maybe within this business or platform that you started?
So for me, it was day one during my experience at Episcopal High School. There was a gentleman named Vincent Hodge who never likes an accolade or personal recognition. He probably asked me to scrub his name off of this podcast and every other podcast that he's mentioned on by other kids. But Vincent Hodge is a Stanford and Princeton graduate and a graduate of Episcopal High School. He is a mentor, a friend, a brother, uncle to me. He went from being someone I looked up to as a kid, being one of the dorm parents on the freshman or the sophomore dorm I lived on, to being the director of financial aid is his current role, and he's an admissions officer at Episcopal High School still. But he's someone that was above board at all moments of time in his life. That I can never tell you what it's like to see him out of a shirt and tie in a blazer, because it could be at midnight doing a dorm check or at 7 a.m. in the morning driving a bus somewhere. He is always dressed up in his outfit for work. He used to call me Mr. Lee at all points of time, as I'm sure he called many other students. But that man was someone that made sure that I always had a place and a voice at Episcopal. I was on financial aid, so I know that he made sure that if my dad's job changed or he got a pay increase or whatever, or lost his job, that my financial standing was always there at Episcopal High School, and he's done that for countless generations of kids. But he is just someone I was able to know what it meant to see Black excellence of Episcopal High School, even though there's not one plaque or recognition for him at this point. And he's a person that still to this day I talk to weekly and enjoy the insightfulness of his voice in my ear.
Excellent. That's a great story. On the inverse, we old now. We both washed. We should be like with the shirt. Has that full circle moment come up to you? Now, like a young leader or something like. Do you feel like you invoke the spirit of, is it Mr. Hodge? Is that his last name?
Yeah, Mr. Hodge. So I find it, even though I'm 40, sitting here now with a fractured wrist and a torn patella tendon from an old man basketball injury, I'm still not there yet, man. That as I do this, I enjoy for me. I guess maybe I am there as I let in as a missions officer various students into school to see them come back that have graduated, to dap you up and hug you, to introduce you to their wives, to tell you that they're doing this, white, black, whomever. It's amazing to see these kids, man, that that you opened the door to something they were already opening, but you just gave them their chance to do it and they've taken it and run with it. And so when I get to see these different folks and get to do bios of them, see kids I coached in basketball now having kids or whatnot, and watching them, it lets me know that it wasn't all in vain, man. Those sacrifices, those moments of staying up late to figure out what's next, it lets me know there's promise in that. So yes, I would say as we get older, every generation of kids that graduate from a high school or college to come back to shake my hand, it's that moment of saying, man, that's that attaboy pat on the back that I appreciate.
You're on the other side now. What? How do you? I mean, I know, like, being a person of color. But how do you? Not say evaluate, but how do you reach out and say, this is a person I want to get on my platform? I want to write a bio. What goes through your mind in regards to outreach, or you want to lift up their story?
Really, man, is simply just LinkedIn. I look at LinkedIn, I type in University, George Mason University. I look for brown faces on there. And then because it tells me you're an alumni, once I press the alumni button. And I just reach out if you're a brown face. And then from there, law of averages, if I use the 25 different connections I can make on LinkedIn in a week or a day, maybe 3 to 4 reach out and maybe one falls through with a bio. So it's law
Okay.
of averages, man. So literally, I'm playing a long game of doing this and collecting the bios and just letting people know that as I collect your bio, Phil, it's not about asking you for money, but it's about asking you for time. It's about saying, Phil, is there someone above you, below you, beside you that you can reach out to that makes a connection? Can I give you their email or their cell phone number to make that phone call? And that from that moment, that's the drive for me. It's blindly reaching out to people to say, hey, here's my vision and mission video for Bridging Legacy Across Campuses. Here's my bio, who's who I am. How can you necessarily share your narrative, be it good, bad, positive, or whatever, with the next generation of learners, of BIPOC learners, and also with allies, man, that while I focus on this for BIPOC, it's also about white people hearing these narratives and saying, damn, I was a bystander that did nothing in that moment, or I was guilty of doing something that's talked about in these podcasts. How can I be better not to raise my kids in the same light that maybe I was raised in? Because it's about our kids, man. It's about our kids.
I'm interested. Okay, the inverse. Has someone ever come up to you and apologized off of the narrative that they kind of had that feeling of, wow, I was a bystander, I could have done more, and now this is an opportunity for them to say, I'm sorry, or I'll,
Yeah, man, it was great. I had my what was it, 20th reunion last summer and went back to Alexandria. And some of my white classmates that kind of saw what I've been doing, Bridging Legacy Across Campuses. They're like, dang, man, like you really been like spotlighting a lot of different kids that we went to school with, but I never gave them the time of day because they weren't white. Or man, Jonathan, I heard about a podcast that you said something that happened to you. Man, I forgot that happened. I just looked at it as a moment in time and just forgot about it. But you've been carrying that with you as an adult and you're 40 now. Or there was those white kids that looked up and say, man, it wasn't really that bad, was it? And you kind of look up and just shake your head and be like, you have no idea. And in those moments, man, they give me my purpose of why I reach out on LinkedIn, why I wake up at 5 a.m. on my time to interview someone at 8 a.m. East Coast time, because I just need to do it to fulfill my day and to fulfill my purpose of Phil, when I die one day, I don't want to die when you're like, oh, you were an employee of George Mason or Seattle Academy and you did this for 20 years there. I want them to say Jonathan created his own organization, his own podcast, his own online school content for Bridging Legacy Across Campus, his own nonprofit. And he really made a difference because, again, if you were to leave tomorrow, Phil, they would mysteriously replace you on the ASAP with someone else to fill your shoes and fill your desk. And while that doesn't feel good, that's the business. And I want this to be a moment where we are our own people going by our own North Star, making a positive difference for the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it. I've experienced recent loss, and I think the main thing that we always think about is that no one cares what you wear, your titles, all that. They care about how you made them feel, and being on the other end of hearing people's stories is more so like, okay, you can be replaced financially. You can be replaced in a role, but
It's a
that
business.
emotion, but that emotional stories, you can't really be replaced. Like
Exactly.
that's that feeling, and that's the true impact of people, not status, but how they made others feel, and whether in a positive way they made them feel good, or they left lasting traumas that made people feel bad after they left. And I think you're right too. It's like you're creating digital legacies. Like when you're gone, this if I googled your name or whatever, this content is still out there, to share,
Yep.
like information, a library of information. So go ahead. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah. And now you keep saying like who you are and who I am. I'll speak for myself and maybe you'll lean into this, but there's a moment, Phil, that every day I was raised with my parents, God bless them, that I would be a positive Black man, because I would never know when there's a moment that a white person that's never met a Black person looks at me as a stereotypical Black man. And as we navigate our cars and we drive out to get milk or something for our families at midnight in our vehicles, there's a chance we may not make it home because of our skin tone. And every day I live my life so that I can do good, so that people don't make that misconception about me, who I am. But again, there's a split moment. Someone may not know that and cast judgment. So every day that I greet someone, say, hello, my name is Jonathan Lee, or greet someone in Seattle Freeze of saying, hello, good morning, how are you doing? It's because I don't want them to leave that moment blank of what it means to talk to a positive, educated, professional father and Black man.
I get that. I mean, that definitely invokes a lot, especially, I find myself, even though it's a non-monolithic, I do feel the weight of representation. Like I am representing for this person their first uh, interaction with Blackness, and so that does carry weight. Or like I think about my nephew. My nephew is white, and I think like he loves me as Uncle Phil, but as he goes out and navigates the world, he's gonna think when he thinks of injustices toward Black people. Hopefully, he thinks about his like. I would not want that to happen to my Uncle Phil, and so I do carry that responsibility of being engaged and a positive uncle to my nephew, because I want him to go out in the world and know that personalize those injustices. Oh, it's not just others. That's someone that could have been my uncle. That's someone that could have been someone that's close to me in my life. So I do definitely resonate with that a lot.
They definitely, it's a heavy burden, but it's one we must carry, man.
Yeah, I think it's like it's heavy at the same time. Not say a challenge, but I do take it as an honor. I take it as an honor. It's like if I am going to be a positive representative of a certain identity, then it's an honor, and one, it's like something I want to live up to. As you said, chase excellence, so that model is a very positive model. Sometimes it even checks me from like being, like case in point with my nephew. I talk about kindness and stuff. I had to catch myself and say, I can't come out of pocket because, you know, um, it does center me. Like, if I'm
Yeah, of
frustrated,
course.
I cannot be this and that because I don't want to fly off the handle. So it does help me. It's actually a tool to help me keep me accountable too. Like if I say I'm gonna be a kind person, I look at my nephew and I'm gonna almost not be kind. I'm like, well, that's gonna be contradictory to the person I want to be and the person I want him to see me be. So it does help.
And kids' innocence are so important, that white nephew that you have, and my wife is white as well. And as I raise my biracial kids, there's a moment I'm like, when will my child come home and tell me he can't play with so and so or can't go to so and so's house because they tell him he's Black? And he's only 6 years old right now. But I can remember that moment in my life as a kid being like, man, my invite got rescinded because I was Black. And I'm like, damn, how did that happen? And again, the innocence of a child is so great. But you know that at some point that moment has to change for your kids as they get older.
Yeah, the world comes.
Yep.
So, man, this has been really deep. So let's go into a different subject, maybe a
Yeah.
little lighter. It's called shot for shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I go first.
All right. What's your greatest fear?
I got two.
Gotcha.
Okay, one is straight up heights. I mean, straight up, like that's like normal, like consistent greatest fear. And what I mean by heights, meaning like close to edges. Like I can be in a plane, I can be in a tall building if I'm enclosed. But I'm talking about if I'm like at the Empire State Building and someone says,
Right.
the cliff. That definitely terrifies me. So that's
So I did go skydiving in Hawaii and got over that fear. It was
no
crazy.
done. Nope, not doing it. I'm good.
Yep.
And then the second one is dying alone, like straight up. And what I mean by alone, everyone dies alone because you're like, that's an individual thing. I meant like dying like no one comes to visit me, no one is by my bedside, no one cares. You know, like alone as in no one cares.
Gotcha.
So I think I mean, I'm not saying I'm only nice to people for that, but like that's part of my thing. Like I want to be cared about. That's definitely one of my biggest fears. Like just like, and also just kind of like disappearing without no one ever caring. You know, what's that movie? Remember the movie with Tom Cruise where
Castaway? Castaway, the volleyball?
No, that's Tom Hanks. I'm talking about Tom Cruise when he's like the assassin. It had Jamie Foxx in it too, I think. The point is the dude died on a subway. And
no one
noticed. He just kept on going back and forth on the subway. No one noticed. He was just, like his life, he was like that. Like he literally quietly died on a subway. That's the kind of feeling of aloneness. Like he didn't mean nothing. He didn't mean anything to anyone. And he kind of just disappeared like that. That
was a dark movie, man.
Yeah, it was like an assassin, right, or something like that.
Yeah. He's a hitman. I remember that. Jamie Foxx is a Uber driver. Gotcha.
That's it. All right. Dang, I think you gave me a really good one. I think this is the first time ever. I think I just want to flip it and say the same thing back to you. That's actually impressive. So go back.
Thank you, man. Again, it's what comes with the profession of being a mission director, right? You got to ask kids a bunch of questions every day and things like that, and parents. For me, my biggest fear, very similar to yours, I'll steal it, is being alone. I'm only child, man, and I'm a huge extrovert. So for me, just this injury, man, being in my bedroom, not being able to be around my kids, I don't want to fall on my leg, or about the dog pouncing on me. This is like my worst fear, is being isolated solo to my own devices, my own things like that. And the second one will be drowning. I do not like swimming. I do not like water. So I have a fear of drowning, especially drowning alone. So that'd be horrible.
So I'll ask another follow-up question that kind of rounds with that. If you had a choice between going underwater in a submarine or going out into space, which one would you choose?
Oh, I'd take space.
But then if you die in space, you're floating and it's scarier, at least in your.
It's not Earth. Water though.
See,
not water.
That was
not
the
water.
Same discussion I had. I said I'd rather be like I'd rather drown than be floating in space. So I'm never going in space. That's
and I'd rather be floating in space than drown.
There it is. That's interesting. Very interesting concept.
Wow.
Well, there you go. So NASA, if they ever do an experiment and you're going out in space, Jonathan will go. I'm not going. I'm staying on Earth.
Exactly.
So this has been a great podcast. And now the stage is set. This is the part of the show I call shout outs and plugs. Show love, shout out anyone you want to shout out, families, everyone. And then plugs. The plugs will be the things that you want the listeners to be aware of, the things that you're working on, as well as the ways to reach you that you're comfortable with. So shout outs and plugs. Just go.
My biggest shout outs will be 3 people, 2 of which have passed, with my mom and my dad. I just want to give them shout outs for the legacy and the foundation they placed inside me that I didn't even know what they were doing when they did it. From the spankings to lectures, the long road trips and all those things, that it's laid down the foundation of who I am. My next shout out will be to my wife, who is nursing me back to health bit by bit, step by step, literally, as it's been miserable being on these pain meds and various things, but she's been a blessing to take care of me. Plugs will be, feel free to reach out to me via email at jonathan.lee.blac@gmail.com, or follow me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I am more than happy to entertain anyone and any questions, thoughts, or debates. Plug for Phil as well and all the hard work he's doing at Mason and his greater community and everywhere. I just want to say it's been an absolute blessing to be part of this process, man.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you. I'm definitely going to put your website as well in the notes for those that want to follow up. And if you're a BIPOC person that want to share your story, please connect with Jonathan, share your story. I got a couple people that come to mind. I might send you a random list in the future.
Thank you, man.
Listeners, please follow, like, subscribe to this podcast. If you have time, please give it a rating or review on Apple or Spotify. Also, every episode is dedicated to memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please take time to contribute to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. That's always in the show note of this episode and every episode to help combat food insecurity throughout the world and country. And then lastly, just keep on being good. Share Positive Philter. Share this episode. Keep it going. And positivity is a movement. We're all involved. All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity a Movement. Thanks for listening.